As someone who sits at the helm of a 20,000 people organization and regularly your organization recruits graduates,
Yeah.
are there certain skills that you're now looking for which you did not look for?
We're doing a review of the skills that we have, the skills we might need in 20 years' time at the moment. So it's a good question. We haven't finished the exercise, but increasingly we now look for your ability, not just how intelligent you are or how quickly you can summarize some information, but we will also be looking at how effectively you can communicate. So that's not about asking AI to do something for it, it's asking you there, you now, stand up and explain what does this mean or what do I do? Or looking at how effectively you can work with a different group of people to get a task done. Because as skills become more specialized, it's almost inevitable that in any organization you will have to work with other specialists. And so the question is, how good are you at being able to work with those people? If you're a complete introvert, can't talk to anybody, it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be harder for you to collaborate if you don't look people in the eye, if you can't, listen. And so we pay more attention to those skills. It's nice if you've got a PhD in biology, but in this industry, I need people who can think. I need people who can retain information. I need people who can communicate clearly. And some of those skills are not as valued as much as you might like. And sometimes with graduates, when I used to read graduate reports, I'd be writing this, on their document, what are you trying to say? Because it's just too many words. And again, that's the fault of higher education for not thinking about, and again, because they're often in Britain, we're valuing, it's different in different countries, but we value, these sort of academic skills, and then we think that the employer will develop your professional skills. But there's things that you can do to help.
In Youth We Trust sits down with successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, educators, and others from around the world. We spotlight how individuals and organizations are shaping a better world, directly or indirectly, for the coming generations through their focus on sustainability, equity, education, and more to empower young people to create the future they deserve. And now, in Youth We Trust.
Well, welcome, Ben, to
Thank
the
you.
podcast In Youth We Trust.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm quite excited to have you here. I know in our conversation, you were being very humble that, who's interested in CEO of a market research firm. But I think one could also argue that you have more insights and facts than most other people rather than opinions.
We have lots of information of
Yeah.
varying degrees of reliability. Yeah.
Well, that's the world that we live in, don't we?
Yeah.
So I'm going to take you straight at the deep end, Ben, if you
Okay.
may. So when you were younger, um, was there a particular quest or a particular problem that fascinated you that you wanted to solve?
Probably in a very idealistic way, something minor like world peace. I spent a lot of my teenage years being terrified about nuclear war. This was in the early 1980s when the Cold War was at its height and Ronald Reagan was positioning cruise missiles in Europe. Now, anyway, fortunately, it didn't happen then, or we wouldn't be here. But that was certainly a big concern when I was about 16. And then I remember at university, it was obviously industrial restructuring in Britain. There was massive unemployment. I remember when I got into Oxford, not thinking I would have a great career, but just thinking I'd have a job, because this was the height of youth unemployment in Britain at the time. So I didn't have any, I was sort of worried about the state of the world, but I didn't have any ambition that I was going to end up fixing anything in any way, shape or form. But certainly those were the concerns of my teenage years. And so a very different world. But yes, those are my obsessions when I was much younger.
I mean, you've said a number of things I'll pick up on later on in this conversation, but just sticking to the world peace thing, you were at Oxford. Well, you were a teenager, then you were at Oxford. Did you get a chance to do something about it, or was it?
Well, I was protesting. I was in something called the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and I used to organise demonstrations. So I was doing things. But when I went to university, I I used to go on. There were demonstrations all the time about something, so I used to go on demonstrations. But not, I didn't get in after. I wasn't involved in student politics or anything like that at university. I got into running a nightclub instead. So I was obviously a very shallow person. But anyway, there we are.
Okay. Well, I think one could argue that that's a very interesting job, and a very tough one. I But even if you wanted to, do you think you could have done much about it?
Well, I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. One Scandinavian schoolgirl has garnered global interest in her in the camp, in her campaign. She's somehow got caught the zeitgeist. I mean, this is in the period before social media, etc. So, in some ways, it was much harder to get things. I mean, I remember just like trying to find out what was cool. There was a magazine I used to read called The Face, and this was the sort of Bible of everything that was cool and trendy in London. But if you're growing up in provincial England, which I was, this comes out on paper once a month. So you literally go and find this magazine, and that's your conduit to what is going on. I mean, the world has changed dramatically. So in some ways, I think it's much easier. Everybody now is able to go on social media and say things or articulate. The extent to which they're listened to is a question we might come back to. But no, I didn't. I guess I could, if I really wanted to, I could have gone into politics. I was asked at one point whether I wanted to become an MP. That's much later on. But no.
The reason I'm asking this question is actually we find, through Lumi and through the work that I'm doing, that a lot of the young generation feels quite helpless about the issues that they see around.
But I'm not sure that's new, to be honest. I think that just might be the human condition, to be quite. I'm not sure that that's probably what we would call a life stage effect, rather than a cohort, a terribly disempowered new cohort. I mean, I think it is fair in the work that we've done looking at generations at Ipsos. I think it is clear that so in some ways, young people have far more information at their fingertips than we would have ever had. I found out about new songs or any songs by going to a shop and physically looking at records. When you'd find something you'd vaguely read about somewhere. Now, I've got, 100 million songs on this phone. I can find any piece of music. So in many ways, you could argue they've had more access to higher education, certainly more access to information, possibly more access in terms of choice. I'm the CEO of a global company talking to you from Paris. I would never have dreamt growing up that I would be in charge of a global company. But actually, I am a beneficiary of the last 30 or 40 years of globalization, because what it has meant is that professionals like me, previously I would have been working in Britain, but the globalization of my industry has meant that I am able now to be an executive, in all sorts of, I could go and work anywhere in the world. Those options were not as available before the liberalization of the trade in services, for example, which I'm in professional services. So in many ways, there are more opportunities than ever, but I can also see that the pressure to work hard and do well academically is probably higher. The support of the state in many cases has reduced. So when I left university, there was a sort of vague option that I might be able to somehow survive on benefits. It very rapidly, in fact, I realized I couldn't when it turned out that the Brixton Benefits Office had been attacked by a man with an axe. And because it was pre-computing and all claims were done on paper, they just told me, oh, you won't get any money for 3 months. And I was like, oh, shit, I really better get a job then, which is why I ended up working in market research. And this was after having an Oxford degree. So I think it's better in some ways and worse in other ways. And I think this idea that, the past is always better is not, we all have this bias. It's quite strong. Most of us say that across the world say that we would like our country to be the way it used to be. But I guarantee that if you went back to when you didn't have a mobile phone, you didn't, and racism was much worse than it is today. Maybe hard to believe to some people listening, but I can guarantee you it was. And if you were gay, you would have a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point because the thing is, by definition, the younger generation hasn't seen that much. But the reason I actually say that is, well, two things. One, I was just looking at your Ipsos survey for education, the monitor, and I
Yeah.
think you allude to that point that a lot of the boomers, actually people like us, feel that young people have it harder, and you gave some
I
examples
think, but
for that.
economically, I mean, the only way my son is going to be able to get a house is if I basically give him a large amount of money. Otherwise, I mean, it will the amount of time it will take him to save a deposit, earning even with a good job, is just now way longer. I bought my first place when I was, I don't know, 23 or 4 or something. There's no way my son is going to be able to do that. I mean, he's 29 now, and he can't get just to get the deposit together, let alone, and then to get to earn enough to pay a mortgage in London. So some things have become much more difficult.
Yeah. And the second reason I said that is, I find globally through our work that almost a convergence of three different things happening for this generation in particular. And my daughter is 19 at university. My son is 15, and the three things are: one is climate, the noise around climate, the impact of it. Obviously, you mentioned
Oh,
Greta.
that wasn't an issue at all when I was growing up.
Exactly. Right.
I
The
mean, it was a very
second is
vague concern. Yeah, so that's different. But what I don't completely understand, though, and I study people for a living, is how that is practically manifesting itself in terms of people's, like, yes, so there are some people who want to eat less meat for environmental reasons or travel less or whatever. But most, I mean, they still travel. All I would observe is that they're actually flying way. My son has been to America way more times than I had by the time I reached 29. I can tell you, massively more, for
Yeah, yeah,
example.
that's true. I think I can only point, ironically, to a market research piece done by the Lancet, which says that basically 70% of under 18s are suffering from some form of climate anxiety. I was very surprised when I
Ah,
read that
I
number.
think there is. I think so. On this one, I think it's an interesting one. So there is more. People are much more concerned in surveys about mental health than 20 years ago. Absolutely no doubt about that. There is some evidence that this and heavy use of this is strongly correlated with poor mental health. We aren't completely sure if you've got mental health problems, you actually end up becoming a heavy user of certain social media sites. So how the causality works on that, I don't think is completely clear. And I think it's complicated because, as with sexuality, um, people are now, the taboo about mental health has completely changed in the last 30 years. So now people talk about it. So I think we need to be careful with mental health to say, because a lot of people went through World War II and saw all sorts of absolutely horrifying things, and their mental health undoubtedly suffered, but how they dealt with it is different to perhaps how young people would talk about it now. So I think we need to be a little bit careful, but undoubtedly we talk about it more, and we are potentially more anxious. How much of that anxiety is something that 50 years ago we would have just sort of said, well, look, frankly, get on, just shut up, that's life, it's the human condition, just get on with it. And in a way, it's good that we acknowledge it, but at some point, now I sound like an old git, where does it stop? But anyway, and you notice, for example, that suicide rates among Africans who have amazing real world difficulties in finding enough food, escaping guns, etc., is actually much lower than in, say, many Western societies where at least, the things that we have are more prevalent. So there's a whole load of things going on there that are not completely clear.
Such a good point. That's such a good point. So I totally agree with you. In fact, again, I saw that the research points is pointing out that mobile phones should be banned for under 14s, and I'm hugely
It might be a good idea. I mean, it'd be
very good idea.
quite good for me to be banned, for me to be banned from it. I find I have more books than ever because I can order them easily. And of course, as soon as I start reading one, I want to go and look something up on here. and then I'm distracted. Whereas actually getting lost in a book is a brilliant thing, and the evidence is that you absorb more information from a longer period of studying than jumping from one thing to another on a mobile.
Absolutely. I agree. On that note, actually, the offices that I'm sitting in, the founder of this company, it's called Perion.
Yeah.
These are data and AI specialists for
Okay.
marketing teams for the likes
Yeah.
of Vodafone, Pernod Ricard, and the AA. Now,
Yeah.
he was telling me that his son was unusual. He was actually at the age of what, 13, reading The War and Peace and getting
Yes.
through it. But then he discovered TikTok.
Ah.
Okay, and
The
now
end.
reading is gone,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I totally relate to your point,
Yeah.
and so the first point was climate, but the second point for this generation
It's
is now that
distraction.
distraction and the advent of AI, which is
Mm.
the big daddy of social media in a way, because now you've got AI. On the one hand, it's making their life very easy when it comes to submitting an essay or probably doing research
Yes, I think
or,
there's a real question about quality there.
yeah, I know.
Because I think that our work on AI is showing that it's a bit like it won't produce the Mona Lisa. It will produce something that is superficially good, but in terms of profound knowledge, not yet.
Uh, isn't that the same thing about social media? You might say something really interesting, but whether you have the depth,
Yes, that's true.
this,
I think it. I mean, I use Twitter a lot, even though it's now owned by a lunatic, and I have met new friends from it. I have found out about books and things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise found out about as easily. Although I also get them from reading the London Review of Books on paper, I guess. But I think, yeah, I mean, it is down to how we use, as with all things, it's down to how we use the technology. But I think there is a risk that it's a great escapism to scroll through your phone through TikTok or whatever. What are you really doing? I mean, it's in a way it may be is it healthier than what we used to do as kids, which is hang around and set fire to things and break things? Actually, a lot of children these days are much better behaved and less violent, interestingly, despite some examples of sort of terrible street crime with knives. But overall, the overall level of violence in society is lower. And one argument is that actually it's this anesthetizing effect of everybody's at home scrolling through this rather than having nothing to do and hanging around on street corners and getting in fights.
just hanging on to the whole the AI piece. I think the again, so much information about, hey, the world's changing, 400 million
Yeah,
jobs are going and 97 are coming in, and this and that. So what's my future looking like? I think fundamentally it comes down to, when I think about the younger generation, it's what do you control, right? And
yeah,
what you control is you can actually do something about the problem, right?
yes,
And that's why I was talking about agency. But the second thing is you can then therefore prepare for the world that's coming in front of you,
yes,
and you can invest your time in building skills,
yeah,
building networks, as you very rightly pointed out in
oh
your
yeah,
interview, right?
yeah. I think that's a good point, and I think one of the things I would say is that despite one of the things I always say to everybody who works here is that you have more power and more control than you think you do. And the thing that gets you there is you have to be intelligent enough. It's quite hard if you're really stupid, but after that, so much comes down to application, to your personality, to your ability to work with other people. So your EQ rather than your IQ. And I think people don't appreciate that. And then, your networking ability, so making connections. And of course, in a world of AI, doing the things that AI isn't very good at. So AI isn't particularly very good at making connections. It's all it is a pattern at the moment, at least, is a pattern recognition system. It doesn't think laterally. It doesn't. If it's recording a conversation, it won't think, oh, they didn't talk about that. It will just say, yes, they talked about these things. It wouldn't say, isn't it interesting that they didn't talk about this or that, which is what a human would do. So finding those things that human beings are good at. And AI isn't very good at, hairdressing or a whole range of things to do with human beings, because that's going to be, a problem. So I think, but there's so much that you can do in terms of your enthusiasm, your application, turning up on time, being positive. All of these things are things that are valued. Being somebody that people want to. Do you want to work with an enthusiast or a pessimist?
Pessimist. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
People get choices, and these are all things that you can control. And you can, and some of the, we even know that if you smile more, you will be happier than if you don't. You can actually make yourself a bit happier. So I think knowing yourself, and the sooner you can do that, the more in control you'll be, because you can focus on the things that you're good at, and realizing that actually you do have agency. It was only when I stopped sort of being resentful about this company, and I'd been working here for about 7 or 8 years, and I realized I was going to have to stick here unless I was going to do something completely different and earn less money. And it was only when I made that sort of mental decision to be not just good at my job, but brilliant at my job. And again, anybody can do this, that I was given 5% of the company and things, but I had to make that mental decision, not just, life is not a rehearsal, unfortunately. There's no, we only get one go at it, unless anybody on the call has the secret of eternal life. And so as a result, you have to go for it, and that means going for it. And not everybody wants to do that, or they think they can't, or somebody else is stopping them. But actually, the thing that's often stopping you is you. That doesn't mean to say we're all going to get to be CEOs of big companies, because there's a lot of luck involved.
This episode is brought to you by Lumi.network. We're on a mission to help the next generation prepare to take on the world. Our AI-augmented platform runs quests that help 10 to 25-year-olds shape their future by developing AI, entrepreneurship, and design thinking skills to solve the most pressing business and social issues. If you or your organization wants to impact the next generation positively, we'd love to talk to you. To learn more, visit Lumi.network.
Yeah, well, this is what we are trying to do at Lumi, and it's a very hard thing to do. What we are saying to the younger generation is, focus on what you control, focus on building skills, focus
Yeah.
on solving the problems to the extent, and, don't try and change the world, change yourself. There's a very interesting point you make, and again, one of your research papers at Ipsos, you talk about, in innovation, you talk about marrying human intelligence with artificial intelligence. This is
Yes.
exactly what we're doing. So
Yeah.
we are saying, look, let's get you AI
Okay.
literate, AI
Okay.
savvy. Therefore, my view is, which is shared by a lot of people I engage with, is let's educate people, right? Now, still 36% of the parents, compared to 29%, according to your own survey,
Yeah.
are saying that AI should be banned in schools. But this
Yes.
number, the thing is, banning something doesn't work. Educating people about it does, and
Yeah.
gives them agency to use this. So that's really, that's
I would also, I mean, I did history, and I think the other thing to remember, which may not be very helpful, but I always take the long view, is in a way, the arrival of social media and AI-powered social media, if you like, Prashant, is actually, you can relate, it's similar in terms of its potential disruption to the invention of printing. Now, for those of you who aren't into when this was, it was around 1450, and obviously it took longer to get to Rome in 1450 than it did in AD 50, because the roads were not as well maintained in the late medieval, early modern period as they were under the Romans, which is an interesting idea. But bottom line, it took once printing got going and ideas began circulating. And this is a society where average age of death is maybe 30 or 40, God is everywhere. God is a fundamental part of your life. Suddenly people are questioning, well, hang on a minute, this book, I've now got this book, the Bible, in my own language in Europe. And it tells me that this guy down the church who's telling me these things, actually, I'm not sure I agree with this. Now, and so but as a result of printing, millions of Europeans died in wars that are similar to the conflicts between Shia and Sunni Muslims of today or of the late 20th century. And millions of people died because they were saying, well, is this actually the blood of Christ in this wine glass, or is it just a representation of it? There's a lot of other things concerned. But the point I'm making is it took time. It took a long time for us to work out what was acceptable to be printed, what shouldn't be printed, how should you react to it, our ideas. And I think in a way, how we handle social media and the speed of electronic communications that we now have available to us, we're in this same process, but it's obviously speeded up. But it's disruptive to our society, and so but also remembering that we've had disruptive technologies before. So printing was incredibly disruptive. Before, you had to remember everything, or have it written down by hand on bits of paper, which is what monks were doing, which is why we have any of the classic literature in the West, because monks wrote it all down and it survived. So I think it's a very, 20 years or 15 years or whatever we're now into of social media, and now, of course, AI will enhance it. That's a blink of the eye in terms of our evolution of how we get to deal with, how we learn how to manage things. So I'm sure we will. And we're always worried about new technology. Remember when bicycles were invented or became popular in the late 19th century, there were concerns that they would lead to mass sexual licentiousness because people would suddenly be able to travel around at night in the dark and go a long way and find other people and do, there were concerns when railways were invented that the human body would break up at over 40 miles an hour. So we're always worried. I mean, part of the human condition is to be worried about new technology.
You said that in the beginning.
We're always worried about new technology.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting perspective coming from you. So let me just shift the question a little bit to looking at the world of work, right?
Yeah.
Today's world, requires arguably certain skills, which I call durable skills, which are always going to remain relevant, right? Some of which you talk about, right? Networking, just sheer persistence, hard work, etc. Some of them are in diminishing quantity in the coming generations. But as someone who sits at the helm of a 20,000 people organization, and regularly your organization recruits graduates, are there certain skills that you're now looking for which you did not look for? For example, AI literacy.
We wouldn't. I mean, we tend to think in terms of technical skills that, it's funny, we're doing a review of the skills that we have, the skills we might need in 20 years' time at the moment. So it's a good question. We haven't finished the exercise, but yes, it's good to have some coding skills. But the point I would make about AI is that actually, 5 years ago, they're saying, learn coding. And 5 years before that, it was learn Mandarin or something, literally. And now, of course, actually, the AI will do the coding for you.
Yeah.
But increasingly, we now look for your ability, not just how intelligent you are or how quickly you can summarize some information, but we will also be looking at how effectively you can communicate. So that's not about asking AI to do something for it. It's asking you now, stand up and explain what does this mean or what do I do? Or looking at how effectively you can work with a different group of people to get a task done. Because as skills become more specialized, it's almost inevitable that in any organization you will have to work with other specialists. And so the question is, how good are you at being able to work with those people? If you're a complete introvert, can't talk to anybody, it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be harder for you to collaborate if you don't look people in the eye, if you can't, listen. And so we pay more attention to those skills.
Yeah. So I think in some sense you're saying that you're looking at different things, but have you, I didn't find it, but have you undertaken any kind of recent research on what are companies looking for?
We've done it periodically over the years. And I think this is a key point, that generally what we find with young people is that they believe, and of course their teachers will also tell them this at school, that the main thing is obviously to get some good exam grades, etc. But to be honest, I don't care whether you've got a PhD or an MA or a DPhil or just a BA. because actually I'm going to train you in a number of specialized things that we do here. The academic qualifications in this field are probably, they're okay, but actually what's more important is your overall ability to absorb information, a diverse range of information, to find things out quickly, and then, of course, in this industry, to understand, to reach judgments, and we will help you learn how to reach judgments. And then, of course, ultimately to communicate what that might mean in terms of what the implications are of what you've found. It's nice if you've got a PhD in biology, but in this industry, I need people who can think. I need people who can retain information. I need people who can communicate clearly. And some of those skills are not as valued as much as you might like. So I'm always a bit annoyed with humanities people with humanities degrees like me, where they love rather sort of prolux, very long-winded essays, expressing, writing. And I want somebody who writes like The Economist. My clients don't have time to read your 5,000-word essay on Jane Austen. They're not, we have no time. We need to know as succinctly as possible, what are you meant to do about this? And sometimes with graduates, when I used to read graduate reports, I'd be writing this. What are on their document? What are you trying to say? Because it's just too many words. And again, that's a fault of higher education for not thinking. And again, because they're often in Britain, we're valuing. It's different in different countries, but we value these sort of academic skills, and then we think that the employer will develop your professional skills. But there's things that you can do to help.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of the bridge that we are trying to actually
Okay.
build,
Yeah.
so that the people are coming into the workforce work
Yeah.
ready, and
Yeah,
having
sure.
you
I
have
think
these
working as
guys.
an intern, one thing that's very clear is that if you get some decent summer experience and come and work for me as an intern in the summer, you will be way ahead of your competitors for these jobs because you'll have got some comprehension about what it's going to be like. And I wished I'd worked here before I went to university, because I worked out afterwards that I would have been way more productive at university if I had actually done some practical work experience first.
That's such a good point. Yeah, that's one of the things we are looking into. Now, I think we've got limited time, so um, I'll just look at one aspect. Now, you are a research company developing insights, and
Yeah.
now comes AI, which, and we've already talked a lot about proliferation of information and
Yeah.
overload, etc. So, how are you dealing with AI and
Yes. Well,
helping people
we've
differentiate?
embraced, we've embraced it. I think because it allows you to do things much more quickly. So you can summarize information much more quickly. You can analyze billions of tweets or posts online. And now, now AI, you can build a large language model with this data and then you can interrogate it. So it allows us to do things that were not possible before. But it also means that some of the things that we were doing before may become redundant in the same way that um, the arrival of the internet and software packages like, there's things like SurveyMonkey. We're building products that use AI and combine, as you pointed out, human intelligence with artificial intelligence to help us do things faster. And my sort of dream with it is that, I always challenge my chief operating officer. The average 27-year-old is doing a lot of repetitive things here. How can we make sure how can we use the AI and automation? And to be honest, automation is as or more important than AI, to be quite honest, to let this person just use their brain and think rather than just checking that something's been completed properly or something like that.
Yeah. So I think as a final question, Ben,
Yeah,
do you feel, knowing so much about different topics and about society, about
yeah.
economies, about education, etc., do you feel more optimistic about the future, or do you feel more circumspect?
I think I think only the paranoid survive is one of my favorite quotes. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And I
Andy
think
Grove.
there's plenty of, we seem to have muddled through. When I was growing up in the 70s, there was real anxiety that there would be mass Malthusian famines by the year 2000. We would run out of oil, we would run out of platinum, and somehow we managed to unleash amazing productivity and actually lift billions of people out of poverty. Now, and we didn't have a nuclear war, so ka-ching, this was you can look back and say, now, the only trouble is just because we got away with it last time doesn't mean that the next 30 years we're going to get away with it, because humanity is always capable of doing stupid things. So I do tend to optimism in the sense that overall there are more people with more access to information, with better quality of life. It's better to be black, gay, a woman than it certainly was in 1970, I would say. I mean, some black gay women might come and argue with me, but I'd say in general, we are more liberal, and generally we treat kids better than we did 50 years ago, undoubtedly. If you just look at how much time men spend with their children compared to 50 years ago. But at the same time, we face, massive resource. We're now edging up against massive resource constraints again, but this is in terms of overheating the planet. I mean, I'm sure we'll find, we won't run out of oil because we'll find some other energy source, but we may have managed to destroy the environment on the way. And that was a slightly different concern. But there are always these concerns. So I don't want to sound complacent because we seem to muddle through. I think there are new threats in the same way that the nuclear bomb was a threat that people in the 1920s couldn't have even imagined. And AI potentially is possibly a threat. So I think you have to be optimistic that overall history has generally, as a historian, people have generally become freer and having more, over time, and have more. There is more humanity rather than less over time, but only the paranoid survive. So we need to make sure that we don't do anything stupid.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, yeah, in the times that we are living in, we certainly have to think like that. What's going on around us is a cautionary tale. But on that note, Ben, thank you so much for coming. I think
My pleasure.
the risk with having people like you on a show is that we get obsessed with data, facts, and figures. But you balanced being a historian with being a CEO of a market
Yeah,
research firm with just pure simple common sense. I think that's that's
my
underrated. Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, please leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have a story or someone you know does, please recommend them to us by email at hello@lumi.network. We'll see you next time on In Youth We Trust.